All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back for yet another episode here of Knight Brothers Commentary. Taking a fun turn back into something that, Matt, I know you are very passionate about and have been peppering me over the last several years on how great it would be to have public transportation.
Agreed.
And so, yeah, we've actually seen some of that hit home here with the Red Line here in Indy. I'm not sure if you've got that on the topic here, but I think I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And also, I think it's coming at a fitting time where, just in politics on a larger scale, we've got the proposal of the $2 trillion infrastructure bill from the Biden administration. And public transportation is a big part of that. Or I shouldn't say big, it's a part of that. Anyways, new public transportation, Knight Brothers Commentary. Matt, why don't you kick us off?
All right. So essentially, I've kind of broken down the notes that we have here into different categories, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, we're going to start with planes. Because technically, I mean, they're not like true public transportation in the sense that a lot of people would define that, like i.e. buses and trains.
Right.
But technically, I do see them as a form of public transportation just because, well, they kind of are.
Yeah. Well, certainly as you talk about buses and trains and long-haul buses or trains that travel across the country, that they are, I don't want to say competitive, but there's different options for the consumer.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And planes are one of them. And right now, that's really what dominates a lot of cross-country travel.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great place to start, and
Yep.
we can kind of dive in.
I would say probably the big thing that a lot of people may not like, but I think maybe a lot of people would, is reducing the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration.
Yep.
Because honestly, I think it's just a joke.
Well, here's what I'll tell you. I mean, the TSA was really beefed up after
9/11.
9/11. And not to get off on a tangent here about 9/11, because that's not what this is about. I think there are many 9/11 era, policies, procedures, things that are still in place today that if we really looked at it through the lens of today are probably not necessary.
Absolutely.
And the security hurdles that people have to jump through just to simply go from one place to another for minimal benefit is a challenge. And I don't know how, I don't know where you want to take the TSA conversation, but I would agree with you. It's a bit of a burden.
Now, the one thing I want to say about the TSA is that the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, did a study way back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say like 2011, 2012, somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, by all means, reviewers, if you're watching this, please put in the comments whether or not I'm wrong. But they did this study, and they found that 95% of the weapons that they tried to smuggle through got through. The TSA didn't even find them.
Yeah.
That, to me, is a joke. Now, if that number was a lot lower, I could see why the TSA would be justified.
Right.
But if that number is that flipping high to the point where you can't find more than 5% of weapons that people are trying to smuggle through, especially when it's like an undercover test operation, if you will,
right,
from another government agency.
It's like a secret shopper type
exactly.
setup. Yeah,
exactly. If you couldn't even find them doing it, wow.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I mean, to me, that's just kind of a...
Well, I think what we're going to see happen, and some people will agree with this, some people will disagree. I'm not taking one side or the other, but I think you're going to continue to see technology integrated more and more into this process with hopes that at least my hope would be that it speeds it up. Now, it's probably going to be more invasive from a personal privacy standpoint.
That's
right?
true. I mean, that's a fair point.
And that much of it I'm not a fan of. But I do think you're going to see technology continue to be introduced, because I think the process like you outlined is clearly not working.
Yes.
It's not doing what it's intended to do. B, it's a market that people see a lot of money in, because if it catches on, then that can spread not only domestically here, but if the technology works, it could be a global, transformation in terms of airport security or plane travel or whatever you want to call it. But
yeah,
I just see that, like many industries, becoming less and less humanized and more, technology, artificial intelligence driven, because the reality is they'll I hate to say this, they'll probably do it better, and it won't be 95% rate.
Yeah. So essentially what I was proposing with regards to the TSA is that the TSA will keep 75% of their current budget.
Okay.
Now, the 25% that is being taken away from the TSA will go to A, building and renovating railroads across the U.S.
Okay.
B, building LRT, HRT, or commuter trains, or maybe even like BRT or an ART trains, similar to what the Red Line is here in Indianapolis.
Okay. Now, Matt, for our viewers or listeners, I should say, LRT, HRT, BRT, ART, what is that all?
Yeah. So essentially LRT is basically light rail train. It's essentially just kind of like a small, it's basically saying like how many passengers can be fit on it. Yeah. So LRT is like probably like no more than 50 passengers per train car or something like that.
Okay.
HRT is a little bit heavier, so heavy rail transit, and commuter trains are just kind of like regular trains that you would find Amtrak using, but they're used for commuter purposes, if you will.
Okay, fair enough.
And essentially, so basically, that's part of where the budget's going to.
So the TSA budget's being reappropriated to help fund some of these rail systems.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, the remaining 75% that they will have will go to A, the pre-check and global entry programs. I mean, those will still remain in operation.
Yep.
And then you also have more TSA agents being used to check passenger tickets and IDs, at least 2 for larger airports like Chicago, O'Hare, and Indianapolis, or 2 for smaller airports like the one at Hilton Head.
Yep. Very small.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really need that much, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Another few TSA agents, 3, will use dogs, handheld metal detectors, and CT scanners to track any potential illegal substances or weapons being smuggled.
Yeah.
Because
that's where I think the technology piece is going to come into.
I know. I feel like we need to step away from expensive technology and just go to simple handhelds.
Oh, okay. That's fair.
I think that's what we should do.
Oh, so you're taking the opposite tact.
I'm taking the opposite approach.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And then the rest of the TSA agents will essentially kind of have the same responsibilities as CBP officers at airports.
Okay.
So you remember when we flew in from with Dad from Mexico?
Yeah.
When we took that trip and we flew in, where was it? Was that Atlanta, I want to say?
We flew from Puerto Vallarta to Atlanta.
Okay,
yes.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we came up across one of those officers sitting at that desk.
Yeah.
That's technically the CBP, the Customs and Border Protection.
Yep.
I mean, they're technically they're basically, their job is essentially to just, it's basically kind of like immigration it's basically immigration control, if you will.
Yeah. Verifying passports.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you bringing in the country?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just the role that they have at airports. So essentially, that's kind of what I had the idea for the TSA for.
Okay.
Now, the full body scanners, they can either be sold to schools or private businesses, or maybe even going to government buildings if they want.
Yep. So you're doing away with the full body scanner.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
Because I just feel like it just slows everything down.
Oh, it tremendously slows it down, man.
And I just don't feel like, it just slows everything down, and it doesn't really offer anything of real substance with regards to security, at least in my opinion.
Well, it's not, it would be very, how do I say this? If somebody's going to bring a gun or something onto a plane, I think they would be very, very stupid to do it in the first place. But even more ridiculously stupid to take it into the body scanner with them.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that you're going to get it through there. So I think you're getting a lot of people that are just, I could be wrong. I certainly, this is not my area of expertise, but I'm just curious how many times that body scanner actually gets tripped where they're confiscating something of legitimate, potential harm. Maybe I'm wrong. And if you work for the TSA and I'm wrong, please let me know. But I understand what you're saying, Matt.
Yeah. So now we're just going to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah, please.
And we're going to go to driving and highway travel improvements.
Okay.
Now, for all highways in the U.S. with at least 6 total lanes, i.e. 3 on each side,
yep,
there must be at least one high occupancy vehicle or HOV lane.
Yep.
Which I would probably say...
It's like the carpool lane.
Yeah, essentially, yes. Yeah, so basically these HOV lanes are going to be reserved for motorcycles, buses, corporate sponsored transportation vehicles.
Okay. And when you say that, corporate sponsored, you're talking about?
Yeah. like essentially like basically like, I don't know, like a van or something that has like a sticker on it, like Lyft or Uber, if you will.
Yep.
Essentially those kinds of things, not necessarily
just a wrapped vehicle.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand what you mean. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, emergency and law enforcement vehicles.
Yep.
I mean, for obvious reasons. And then you also have non-environmentally friendly vehicles with at least 2 occupants.
Okay.
And then environmentally friendly vehicles with regardless of the number of occupants in the vehicle.
Okay. So if you're driving a hybrid
Yeah.
or a Tesla or something like that, that lane is open to you.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just trying to please the more environmentally friendly folks with this because
Which you have to do.
I mean, which you kind of have to do. And not only that, but I guess I'm kind of with them, I guess, in a way, because I feel like we probably should be at least trying to pursue more environmentally friendly vehicles. Because when you think about it, I mean, think about all the pollution that we've been putting into our environment over the past couple of decades. And I feel like, I mean, it's just like, yikes.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think that there's a climate debate going on, and unfortunately you have, as in many times when there is a debate, you have people deeply rooted in one side or the other. Yeah. And I think it's very nuanced. You know, am I an alarmist? No, but can we do better? Yes.
Yeah.
And
I feel like hopefully this will allow, I just hope that it kind of pushes us to at least do something better. Yeah. At least that's the way I see it.
It's incentivizing people to purchase a hybrid if they can, or an electric car. It's giving them a lane that hopefully is reduced traffic and an easier commute.
Yeah. Now, kind of switching gears a little bit. Yeah. There's going to be some new federal taxes with regards to driving. So, okay. Now, all drivers are going to be paying an excise fuel tax and a vehicle miles per travel tax, or the VMT tax. So, for gasoline, that's basically going to be 14.66 cents per gallon. Okay. Diesel is going to be 12.75 cents per gallon. Electric, hybrid, and other environmentally friendly cars or vehicles will be 7.5 cents per gallon. Yeah. And then a 1 cent per mile driven will be the VMT tax. Yeah. And all of these are going to be listed in 2021 dollars and will be subject to annual inflation changes. So keep that in mind.
I got to tell you, I'm just going to interject my opinion. Not a fan. Not a fan. I heard Pete Buttigieg come on a couple weeks ago and talk about this mileage tax.
Now, here's the thing. I mean, a lot of states actually do this on their own. There isn't a federal one at the moment. But when I introduced this tax, I also lowered all the excise fuel tax. Okay. So the ones I just listed are actually lower than the current ones that we're using.
Okay, fair enough. So it balances it out.
Yeah, so it tries to balance it out a little bit.
Okay, I can appreciate that. I from a mileage standpoint, I mean, some people,
do drive more than others,
and I don't think you want to penalize somebody who maybe. I think about it from the standpoint of someone who is commuting to work because maybe they have to work in an area and live in a different area just based on their means, right?
And that's true.
Are you going to penalize somebody who has to drive an hour because he or she wants, their kids to be in a certain school, or they can only afford this neighborhood and he has to go to another city to work? You understand what I'm saying? So
yeah,
you may end up penalizing some of the people that really can't afford the tax the most.
And that's true. I mean that there is a risk to that, but the reason why I decided to have both an excise fuel tax and a VMT tax, is a way to try to encourage people to use public transportation more often. That was the goal that I had in mind.
I get it. People will drive less if there's an environmental benefit to that, if there is a public transportation incentive to that. I definitely understand that. I just, from a, I guess, philosophical standpoint, I think it's an encroachment on somebody's freedom. I just feel like if they want to go from A to B, they should have the freedom to do so without being taxed.
I mean, and I understand that. I understand that. Because if you have the taxes too high, it's too penalizing and they can't do it. So, and that's why I lowered the excise fuel tax.
I get it, man.
So I didn't want it to be too penalizing, but I also wanted to incentivize more people to use public transportation.
You've put some checks and balances in. I get that. Yeah.
Now, all forms of public transport will also be given more priority at traffic signals, because like when you see with the red line here in Indianapolis, you see how they have their own little lights.
Yeah, they got their lane and lights.
Yeah. That's essentially what the HOV lanes are going to be for on highways.
Okay. And these HOV lanes exist in some areas already.
Yes.
The rules for using them are a little bit different.
Yes.
But they do exist.
But they do exist. So I'm essentially just kind of expanding on some things that currently exist.
Yep.
For those who don't really know or understand what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
Now, here's something that you may actually agree with, and I actually find fascinating.
Yeah.
All old buses that aren't really being used should be renovated to become sleeper buses.
Okay.
Because have you heard of the service called Cabin in California, where they have like a nice little bus with a little bed on it that you can use to go from Los Angeles to San Francisco in the middle of the night?
I did not know that. No.
So yeah, that's essentially what a sleeper bus is.
Okay.
It's essentially, instead of a regular bus, you get your nice little bed.
Yeah. That's pretty
and
cool.
And it drives throughout the night.
Yeah. So it makes the commute a lot easier than trying to sleep in a chair.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I've not heard of that before.
Yeah, so I'm saying like all old buses that we're no longer using, we should try to renovate as many as we can to actually use that as a way to encourage more people to use public transportation, because regular buses are kind of meh.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on where you go and
cross-country bus trip would be challenging.
Yeah. So this is a way to try to help make that a little bit easier, if you will.
I like that. That's pretty cool. I did not know about that service out in California.
I mean, you could watch some videos on YouTube, and there's sleeper buses all over the world, not just in California. Yeah. So I just feel like that's a good way to at least incentivize more people to use public transportation instead of just using their own vehicles.
Yeah.
At least that's just my personal opinion.
No, I think
and
it's
people
great.
will be and people will differ.
Yeah, but this is our podcast. It's Knight Brothers commentary, not somebody else's.
Yep. So, kind of moving on to the final section here.
Yeah.
Train travel. So essentially, I want to require Amtrak and host railroads to certify Amtrak schedules. Sets a one-time minimum standard of arrival within 15 minutes of the scheduled time for at least 80% of any 2 consecutive calendar quarters.
That's a lot to digest, man.
That's true.
You got to break that down. What exactly does that mean?
Essentially, what I'm assuming it means is that at least 80% of all Amtrak trains have to arrive at the station within 15 minutes of their scheduled time.
Okay.
So it's just, because Amtrak unfortunately does have a bad track record of being late.
Okay.
And the reason why is because they get delayed by freight trains. The freight trains take the priority on the railroads.
Yep.
So the reason why I wanted to divert some of the TSA's budget away from the TSA in order to build more railroads is to alleviate that problem.
Yep.
And also with this schedule change here, I would say, hopefully with more railroads, there's essentially less dependency on freight trains.
Yeah.
So with that, hopefully Amtrak will actually be a little bit better with regards to being on time for everyone.
Timely.
That was kind of.
Yeah,
that's
it's connecting the dots for me because I didn't connect those on my own, so shame on me. But that makes sense.
Yeah, and essentially the second one is adding a second daily round trip, 8 hours from the first for all national routes and/or interstate routes between major cities. So, like, let's say there's a train service between Columbus and Cleveland in Ohio.
Yep.
And let's say there's only one daily round trip.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if there's only one daily round trip, that route will get a second one 8 hours away from the first.
Okay.
Just to provide at least a little bit more service for people who want to use public transportation but may not necessarily have their schedules lined up.
I was gonna say that it's a limited offering if you don't offer it a couple of times. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just trying to build more on the service, if you will. And now we can have the third change is basically renovating as many old factories as possible throughout the U.S. in order to produce more railroad ties and/or faster train cars and participate in the construction of new railroads.
Yep.
Because when you think about it, we have so many old factories that are abandoned here, no longer used. So if we could actually try to renovate them as many as we can, in order to build more railroads and/or renovate current ones.
Yep.
I just think that just helps improve train travel.
Oh yeah.
Throughout the country as a whole. And I think having improved train travel in the U.S. will be a good thing, in my opinion.
I would agree with that, and I don't know how exactly you incentivize corporations to pick that up. To pick up the mantle there. Yeah. Because there has to be a demand. So. I understand.
We will talk about that in the next episode in this series.
Okay. I won't jump the gun then.
Yeah, and you'll understand why once I actually kind of discuss
Spell
it.
that out. Yeah, makes sense. All right.
Now, the minimum requirements, at least what I think should be the minimum requirements, are having 2 railroads, like one beside each other, like one being for the passenger train and then one being for the freight train.
Yep.
Like right alongside each other. So that way, because the reason why Amtrak is delayed so much is because Amtrak trains and the freight trains have to use the same rail.
Yeah.
And since technically the freight trains own the rails, they get the priority.
Yeah.
So by having more railroads, that
Makes
way,
it more efficient.
it makes it more efficient, because that way one railroad can be going for the freight train and the other will go for the passenger train, which hopefully alleviates the struggle, the strain that Amtrak currently faces.
Yep.
Because I don't necessarily think Amtrak is all that terrible.
It's not poorly run. They just are operating within a system that is setting them up to fail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, they're poorly run because they're
They
operating.
have no other choice.
Yeah.
They're operating on a rail system that they don't own, and they aren't the priority
Exactly.
liner.
Which is really to their detriment. So if we can build more railroads, hopefully that makes Amtrak far more profitable and a much more decent system, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I get it.
Now, I would say the preferred option, though maybe not necessarily the most realistic one, is having 3 total railroads. So 1 being for the freight train and then 2 for the passenger.
Okay.
But that's not always going to be practical.
It could be a down the road solution.
Exactly. But I would say, but for me, I want the minimum to have 2 total.
Okay.
So kind of like our little highway system that would be built alongside each other. So that way,
Yeah.
if something like that. I mean, just for,
Ease of use.
Exactly. Now, this one might be a little controversial, but I think it's actually a really good idea. Having all school bus drivers, public school bus drivers, being required to become public bus drivers during the summer break and winter break, and they're earning at least minimum wage.
Okay. I don't know if you could require it, but I certainly think you could incentivize it.
Exactly. I mean, that's where I thought the requirement part would be a little controversial, but I do think it's actually a pretty decent idea.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, during the summer, more people are traveling, so, I mean, it makes sense for them to actually
Yep. Increase the capacity of available travel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also during winter break, because especially during Christmas,
Holidays.
holidays, I mean, people are also traveling around those times too, so
Yeah.
it makes sense for them to actually, A, potentially earn more money, and B, provide a valuable service where people don't necessarily have to use their own personal vehicles to travel. So I just feel like
It's a win-win.
overall, it's a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. That's pretty cool, Matt. I this is, I always sit down and I don't exactly, I know the topics and things that we're going to discuss, but I don't always, know the details. And I think a lot of this makes a lot of sense. There's definitely a groundswell movement to try and, like we were talking about, provide some incentives to create a little bit more of an environmentally friendly infrastructure system. The push for public transit has always been there. I mean, you travel in Europe and some of these other countries, and it's a much bigger part of their daily commute, if you will. And so, I think it's you pose a lot of good things. So what can we expect for the second installment of this? Just kind of tease that a little bit.
Now, the second installment is mostly going to be around ticket prices as well as ticket memberships and passes.
Nice.
And that's kind of where where corporations are really going to come into play.
All right.
And I'm not gonna spoil anything just yet, but once I explain it, you'll understand why.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, anything else to add here on the first installment of the public transportation?
Nope.
All right.
I think we're good.
Knight Brothers Commentary signing off.